I knew right away going into Desert Reckoning that it needed to be a book. Um, I, when the manhunt was unfolding, like on day one, and it was a 7-day manhunt, I started looking into it immediately because my friend, the photographer Mark LaMonica, whose house I was staying at as this manhunt erupted, turned to me after we had turned on the television set and we saw that there had just been this shootout at a hermit's trailer in the desert near Mark's house, and he turned to me and said, "Hey, sounds like your kind of story." And people say that to me a lot because much of my work deals with violence in the desert, and sometimes they're half joking, but there need to be certain elements in a story for me to really get involved because each of my books takes years. The elements that I responded to immediately were Joshua trees, which are like a totem for me, and they're that they live in the part of the Mojave that I write about. And then there were these the two main characters, the hermit who killed the sheriff in this remote part of the Mojave. Both of them were misfits, people who chose to drop out of civilization and move to a remote area in order to be left alone. And one of them, the sheriff, this Los Angeles County Sheriff, Stephen Sorensen, wanted to protect the land, and this other character, Donald Cook, the dedicated hermit, just really wanted to live as a desert solitaire and eke out his own living in this strange little kingdom that he cooked up. And the deeper I got into their stories as this manhunt unfolded, and then beyond that, my instinct was confirmed that I needed more than 6,000 words to talk about, who are these guys, who's living in the outback of Los Angeles County, why does someone become a hermit, how do you outfox a massive high-tech posse, for 7 days. I mean, this really did turn into the largest manhunt in modern California history. There was the FBI, the DEA, Edwards Air Force Base, thousands of cops on foot, on horseback, in vehicles, and at the end of the 7 days, a tank from the Gulf War called the Bear was deployed. And here was one guy who went out Tony Montana style at the end, but because he knew the desert so well, he was able to outfox, this gigantic manhunt as these thousands of pursuers, as I said, and so that all of those elements appealed to me early on, and then there was the element of the sacred, which is a big part of my work. These big questions of good and evil play out in this Old Testament scenery. Are people intrinsically good? Is there such a thing as an evil person? Is there a bad seed? What pushes somebody over the edge? Can someone be possessed by evil spirits? And does that happen if you live alone for too long in a desolate place and you start hearing voices? How do you deal with that? And all these questions were popping up for me, and so that drew me in. And as I said, it was all way bigger than the mechanics of the manhunt, which I first wrote about in Rolling Stone. It's kind of my spiritual home, my temple, my church, and my turkey tetrazzini, as I often tell my friends. I grew up on the mostly frozen shores of northeastern Ohio, and maybe that's partly why I was drawn to heat. But also, I never felt at home there. We all have places that resonate for us, and I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. Somehow I had that feeling, and my father used to read the Edgar Allan Poe poem to me, El Dorado, when I was a little girl, and that really conjured up an escape hatch, and I used it. And the first stanza goes, gaily bedight, a gallant knight in sunshine and in shadow had traveled along singing a song in search of El Dorado. And that became my way out of Ohio when I was a little kid. It wasn't just the cold weather that I was wanting to escape. There was a fair amount of turmoil in my family. And then as my parents got divorced, I really immersed myself more and more in the literature of the West, and started running with all these people into our wide open expanses, running in my imagination. So I was traveling with, like, all of the outlaws, Jesse James and other great characters of the frontier, Buffalo Bill, and I started reading Native American mythology and the stories of Black Elk and Crazy Horse, and then later, as I was doing more serious reading, and knew that I had known that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, but I wanted to study certain writers, and I was reading Wallace Stegner and Willa Cather and Mary Austin and just all the classic Western writers, and other writers of other genres as well. But that carried me into the West, and I knew that someday I would actually move there. And after my parents got divorced, I began meeting all these characters who lived on we moved, my mother and sister and I moved from an upper middle class neighborhood to a working class neighborhood. I had this strange sort of riches to rags upbringing, as I tell my friends, and came into contact with all these amazing misfits and outsiders. My mother got a job on the racetrack. She was one of the first women in the country to ride professionally on the racetrack as an exercise boy. So we started meeting lots of amazing characters, and that became my world. And I realized pretty quickly that people in the upper classes and middle class don't listen to anybody in the working class. It's America's dirty little secret, our class system. And I was then living at the low end of it, suddenly from the high end to the low. And I was like, wow, this is, no one's paying attention no one's listening to any of these people, and no one's listening to us. I mean, suddenly certain relatives of ours stopped talking to us because we were living in the wrong neighborhood. And so that, I got this lesson pretty early on, and then that combined my identification with the voiceless, and plus my passion for the desert combined years later when I actually moved west and began exploring the Mojave and hearing stories about people who were literally not being heard, by the outside world, and I felt compelled to bear witness to their lives.